Now, Matt, good to see you. Welcome to PitchCon.
Oh, how you doing?
I'm doing
Great.
great, man. I know that it's called the Yee-Haw factor, but it's a much larger title, and I couldn't do all of it for the schedule. Okay, I had to shorten it a little bit.
I like
um,
it's good. It gets a little bit of mystery there.
there you go.
Um,
So tell everybody about yourself.
what we're gonna do is basically I've always been interested in perfect games and no hitters. I wanted to try to see if we can basically somehow model and make some probabilities to see if we're getting no hitters at a rate that we would expect.
Well, there you go.
And some of the challenges in actually trying to model data or model outliners in baseball. It's easy to do the easy stuff, but the things that are you've had 200,000 baseball games and you've had 300 no hitters and 23 perfect games. Those are outliner games. So, and another thing I wanted to do is make sure that anybody can do my research.
Hmm.
Um, so that's another big part is I used freely available tools and freely available data. The most expensive thing I used was $100 laptop. Um,
Well, well, I'm gonna say this, guys. You don't want to miss this one because actually one of your clips from I think last year's PitchCon is one of the highest viewed clips on Twitch for us. So you never know what to expect in a good way for during Matt's presentation. So I'll let you take it away.
all right. Well, it's great to be here. As I call it the hee-haw factor. We will explain why it's called that further in there. But the big thing I wanted to do, let's see if my computer is going to do, is basically find a way to rate no hitters. If you look at game scores or something like that for no hitters, yeah, they're up there because there's a lot of strikeouts, no runs generally, a lot of outs, few walks, things like that. But one thing I looked at is Bob Feller threw a no hitter on opening day against the White Sox, and for the season they were slash 287, 340, 387. Lenny Barker threw a perfect game against Toronto. Now he happened to be at home. Bob Feller threw his in Chicago. As you can see, Toronto was not a very good offensive team. They got on base less than three times out of any 10. Bob Feller's game score was 90. Barker's was 98. So I wanted to try to see if there's a way where we can sort of change that if it is a perfect game or a no hitter. So first we had to figure out some sort of probability, um, some sort of model that would describe how a no hitter, the probability of a no hitter, and the probability of a perfect game. Obviously, a perfect game is a subset of a no hitter. There is some math in here, and I worked really hard to get the math as simple as possible. Sometimes during my day job, I do have worked as a data scientist, and I know a bunch of those big terms and all that fun little libraries that you can use to put things in a matrix and do all that. I wanted to make this as simple as possible, make the math not as difficult. Like I said, one of the things I want to do is be able to have people do the exact same thing I've done. And I'm going to use the game score and then adjust that for that. But let's all state, but rating a no hitter or a perfect game is sort of a silly thing to do. They're great accomplishments in either way. And I'm not trying to say that some of these was bad. I'm just trying to get a way to see how we can rate them, but more and more concerned about getting this model together on how to do that. These are some of the strange things I think about when I can't sleep. So first, we have to describe exactly what we're going to call no hitter, and because of the math that I decided to use, this is what we have to do. If a pitcher has pitched a no hit, a pitcher's pitched a no hitter if he gets a complete game of at least 9 innings where he does not give a hit to the opposing team. A perfect game is awarded if no batter reaches base in a no hitter. Perfect games are assessed at no hitters. Yes, this does not include games that were 7 innings, even though it was quote unquote a complete game. Um, a lot of it has to do with just how I set up my model. I could change the model in the future to look for that. But for right now, if a complete game is not a perfect game or no hitter, it has to go at least 9 innings. So you guys are everybody's just going to have to get over that. now the most difficult part is how do you figure out what a mathematical model for a perfect game or a no hitter. This took me a while to go through, mainly because we have to look at a lot of things, and no hitters go back to about 1875, where we didn't have a lot of advanced stats. We didn't know spin rates. We generally used the same baseball for the entire game. So, had to find some areas where I had data that I could access, data that I could check the validity of, clarify it, do a couple checks. I needed ways to take that data and put it in and get the information that I needed. And it would have been helpful if I had a uniform set of rules throughout baseball that make sure that the stats that happened in 1881 were following the same rules and the same standards in the same way that happened in 2021. And right there, we know we have a problem because things like sacrifices and errors and balks and things like that were completely different even in the 1920s than it is now. So we have to make some changes to the data, or at least try to work around some of those problems. So first thing we have to do is uh, we have to look to see how people get on base. And there's that old story that there's 7 ways you can get on base. You can walk, you can get you can get a hit, you can walk, get hit by a pitch, have some sort of defensive interference, a drop third strike, an error, or a fielder's choice. Otherwise, the batter is out. And there's a couple other different ways, but those are the main 7 that if you look around, and some people have said that these 7 rules are what they taught their children. So we're going to use that as our example as we try to work into this model. So basically what we'll do is there's 3 actions that can happen. Somebody can get out, they can get a hit, or they end up on first base or beyond by some odd occurrence that is not a hit. So we're going to look at that way, and we can break that down a little bit. And this took a lot of math and data clarity and got it out of our way here. So here's the math stuff. Outs, hits, and on bases are 3 true outcomes for the pitcher. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at what the percentage of outs and hits to batters faced, and then calculate that percentage. It's essentially like figuring out some sort of odd combination of batting average or on base percentage minus your hits or something of that nature. The problem we have into is we really don't record batters faced for a pitcher all the way across. A good way is take your at bats plus your walks plus your hit by pitch plus your sacrifice flies, and that will give you and that's generally used, say, like in the current on base percentage stat. The problem is that sacrifice flies weren't a thing for a while and they weren't recorded. And although some people have come back and looked at data to try to create the sacrifices and record them, it's not uniform, it's not standard, and depending where you get your data from, they may not include that. So we have to go back and do some searching. And there is a way that we can estimate our at bats plus sacrifices, and that is sort of equal to your outs plus your hits. So now our batter's face that we're going to use, looking at it from a pitcher's perspective, not the hitter stepping up, is outs plus our hits plus our base on balls plus our hit by pitches. Except for one thing, there's errors, and errors count as an at bat, but the player gets to go to first base, which would then of course, take away from what we're doing here. And they do get significant. In 2021, there was 226 errors, or 228, depending on the source that you go to, in 4,858 team games. When we talk about this, we're talking about the home and the away team. So take your number of games, multiply it by 2. That's how many team games you have. So that gives us about half an error per team per game. In 1883, there were 7,669 errors in 157 team games. or about 4.88 errors per game. Notice once again that sometimes our older data is odd because we're missing a team game. There's a game where they don't have the information recorded for the visiting team. They only have it for the home team. So we're missing some data there in that case. And in fact, it wasn't until 1950 that baseball started averaging less than one error per team game. The first time it happens was in 1925. And when you have an error, there is a chance that a runner is going to advance to first base or beyond, and sometimes it's beyond. So we need to include that in our batters faced somehow, and also include that as some of our percentages that we're going to use for whether it's a hit out, how much we get a hit and out or on advance. One thing to point out: before 1950, you generally had one error per game or more. Anybody that threw a perfect game before, if you go to before 1920, you pretty much were guaranteed 1 to 2 men on base due to an error. So if you threw a perfect game back before then, you had a rather big accomplishment, that because generally your fielders were not going to save you any. No hitters were a little bit easier because you didn't include that in there. But how do we figure out how the batters go? The best way to do it is if we had play-by-play data for everything back to 1876. We don't. We do have a lot of play-by-play data. There is a website called retrosheet.org. I use their stuff quite a bit. They have play-by-play data for every game since 1973. And they do have an extensive amount of play-by-play data for games going back to 1901. They have about 177,000 games with play-by-play data. So I will be able to, what we can determine with using this is now we can actually see, according to play-by-play data, how many times is there an error and how many times is that batter get on base. I don't care, since we're looking at perfect games and no hitters. I'm not concerned about what happens to the runners or anything. Just I want to make sure that the guy that's on first base, the guy that's batting, if he gets to first base or past that. So I went into the retro sheet data, and their events data you can convert into basically database format. And I'll have an article coming up about how you can do that and stick it in your own database. You don't want to do this in Excel. I understand the other guys like Excel. Play-by-play data for 177,000 plus games is bigger than what you can handle in Excel. So what I did is I went in and I looked when there was an at-bat, there was an error, and if the batter got on first base. This is commonly called runner on error, ROE, or row. I found from that data that about 55.1% of the time when there was an error, the batter reached first base. So now if we know the number of errors, and this was fairly consistent throughout the season, it's changing a little bit in the recent years, but I have to go back and check that. But from basically 1901 to 2021, for those 120 years, it stayed right around 5.1 with a standard deviation that was about a half. I mean, it's really good ratio. So we're going to use 55.1 multiplied by the number of errors to tell us how many base runners we get because of errors. Now I want you to think about that. For a good part of baseball's history, you pretty much guaranteed getting about every other time or something like that, you'd have an error and you'd get a base runner. And I think you can see that's part of the reason why for the first 105 years of Major League Baseball, we had 13 perfect games. Since then, since 1981, we've had 10. Because obviously it's easier to have a perfect game if your fielders are not letting people get on first base and holding them more to just having to worry about walks, defensive interference, and those type of things. So that's one of the reasons that we can look at, and this model seems to say this is why we're getting more perfect games recently, because obviously, well, two things: we have more games, we play more games than we did back then, we have more teams, we have bigger seasons, and our fielders are a lot better. So now we got to incorporate, I know more math, we got to incorporate our runners on runners scored on error, get on base on error, because remember, we're not including at bats. So we have to include this as at bats into our thing. So now we know our batters faced. We can calculate outs. That's fairly easy. We take innings pitched times 3. We know how many hits because that's recorded fairly well. And we can say the other stuff is this percentage. Since everything has to be 100%, our other stuff percentage would be, and I messed up the math here, we would take 1 minus our pitcher out percentage and our pitcher hit percentage. So, but I don't really use the other, it's sort of a given, and you'll see why in the model. So now we want to model this. There's all kinds of different, there's Monte Carlo models, there's all kinds of modeling things. I want to do it pretty simple. So to do and test my theory, the first thing I did is I took the play-by-play data where I know everything, everything's a constant. And inside there's 196 no-hitters and 18 perfect games for a total of 224 total no-hitters. Now, one thing we have to do is we have to have a specific set of pitchers. Since the game has changed a little bit, where it used to be the guy started the game, he finished the game unless his arm fell off, or he was maimed, or he passed out drunk. So we want to do something that we sort of get mostly starting pitchers into our model, because it'd be unfair to like use Mario Rivera's stuff and project that over 9 innings, because he couldn't do that over 9 innings. He could do it for 1 or maybe 2 innings. So what I decided, I would look at pitchers that started at least half the games they appeared in, and they threw over 54 outs or 18 innings. That gave me 13,391 specimens. So now I have to do a model for them. This one was very simple. It's a very simple program that I created inside my database using the RetroTree stats, all the information I needed for all of those pitchers. So I had their sacrifices, their at-bats, and everything like that. And remember, I generate this from play-by-play data, so it's fairly accurate. And I put those in there, and then for each pitcher, and I did it by season. You can't go by a pitcher's career and try to do this, because obviously careers are going to have ups and downs. If somebody plays for 20 years, there's a good chance those last 5 years are going to be very different than their first 5 years. So what I did is I created the stats for each pitcher that they met their criteria, which meant Roger Clemens is in there for 23 years. So when I ran his data, I would do it for each year that he pitched. I would use his season stats. And then all I did, in the very simplest term, is since these are all percentages, I generated a random number. I tried to make sure it was very random. And I would just start a loop. And then for every game that they started, I would go through that season using those stats. And if the number was within the percentage of their outs, I recorded an out. If the number with it was, then I would take the out percentage out, and then I'd say, well, if it's between the hit percentage, we're going to record it as a hit. And if it's anything else, we just record it as on base. And then if it's an out, we record it, we increment the outs, and then we start over with a new number. If it's a hit, we stop. We're only worried about no hitters, so we stop here. If we get this 27 outs, we'll have a no-hitter. And if there was nothing on base or in the other, we'll record that as well, I'm sorry, if there's outs with no hits and no other, it's a perfect game. If there's an other and no hits and 27 outs, we call that a no-hitter. And I just started to run the model for 100 times. It took probably 3 minutes on the crappy old computer I used. I got a total of 200, an average, 200 no-hitters, which included perfect games. And we had 21 perfect games. And if we remember, we had 196 and 18. So the numbers are fairly close, coming off exact data. But we're still using this runners on error, which I really think is the issue, and it really did prove to be the point in here. The errors are just killing me on this, because it's really, we're using this constant that we're assuming it's constant. It's not really constant. So what I did is I took and created the ROE for each pitcher for each season and used that into the database, and I got it much closer. We had 198 no-hitters with 17 perfect games, which is really close to the actual numbers. Then I decided, since I have the play-by-play data, I don't have to calculate percentages. I can figure out how many batters they faced, how many outs they had on the batter, how many hits they gave up, and how many of the others. So I went and I did another created another set of data that was specifically all of that information, which was really just looking at if the guy got first base, was it because of a hit or something else, and everything. And the numbers were the exact same. So for me, I said this model is working. We have a problem with the ROE. It's going to cause us to be off, and it could cause us to be off significantly as we get back to less data. But I think the general model of outs divided by batters faced and hits divided by batters faced works. The problem we have is properly calculating the batters faced. So now what I wanted to do is I've used all this on RetroSheet's play-by-play data. Now I wanted to go and I wanted to use data that I had that you can use. That's all the seasons, hits, all that stuff, pitchers, which teams they played for, and all that. It's called the Baseball Data Bank. It's by Sean Lehman, not the Sean Lehman of Baseball Reference, but another guy that happens to be Sean Lehman that likes baseball stats. And I'll include links to this. So then what I did is I took his data and manipulated it so I had the same information I did with the RetroSheet data. So now we're going to go and we're going to run the same model. We're going to go from 1876 to 2020. We're going to run that same program. This time I did it 1,000 times because I had to go shovel my driveway, get the snow off my driveway. So the same requirements. Half your games are half the games you started. You started half the games that you were in. You had at least 54 outs, and we used the 55.1 as the ROE factor. And we did the 1,000 test. With that, it included 270 no-hitters, and that was including the perfect games, and 29 perfect games themselves. So we went a little high on the perfect games, and we're a little bit low on the no-hitters themselves. We're right about no-hitters. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. We had 300 no-hitters, and that included 23 perfect games. So, Yee-Haw! We've got a model that seems to work pretty well. We have some errors with some of the data that we have, but we think we have a pretty good model that we can say, we now want to start checking this a little bit better. And then we can use this against a pitcher going against a team and seeing how we can work that in a little bit into not doing the probability for pitchers themselves or for the hitters, for the pitchers, but just taking a look to see how often it might happen. Now, one thing you might notice is that I ignore the hitters in this, but I don't. Um, I'm not ignoring the hitters. I'm just saying a perfect game is completely up to a pitcher getting outs, not giving up hits, and not letting somebody on base. Um, so that's why I focus more on the hitters. I actually did go back and run some of these things just using batters and doing uh, trying to do lineups and things like that, and it just never got anything close. And it was obviously not a good model. This is not a good way to model how hitters might give you a no hitter or a perfect game, but this model is working for the pitcher side. So I went to the test for the baseball data bank, and I said, let's go from 1901 to 2020. And when I did that, the errors came a little bit closer. So it's obviously that data pre 1901 from 1900 back is problematic. We don't always have all of the information there. We might not have hits for everybody. So we're going to have to go back and start skipping some things there. That's going to reduce the number of no hitters and perfect games that we have. I still think we can use the data to do some of this, but there's going to be some things that we're just not going to be able to do because we don't have all the proper stats for it, which that's one of the problems we had before. So how did I think of the Yee-Haw factor? Well, first of all, the Yee-Haw factor is what I want to do is take the batter out percentage that would calculate using standard stats, batting average, on base percentage minus your batting average, and other. We don't have to calculate the other. So we want to know how many times they get out, how many times they get a hit, and how and then how many times they get on base the other's way. So I'm taking the difference of them, and you notice I'll switch them for a reason, and we'll get into that. And also, I'm not completely happy with the on other base percentage yet. This model works pretty well, but I think to clear things up, I have to look in that a little bit. So we're going to take the batter out minus the pitcher out, and then we have the pitcher hit percentage minus batter hit percentage. We're going to use that to create the Yee-Haw factor. Now, I know everybody's thinking, how in the hell did you get the name Yee-Haw factor? Well, when I first ran this model against the retro sheet data, checked my code, checked some things, and realized that I was on my path to going somewhere. I was listening to a band called Bellafleck and the Flecktones, and the song I was listening to was number 11, the Yee-Haw factor. So I got the name from that. And people say, why are you naming a stat after basically some band you may have never heard of? If you don't know, Bela Fleck has been nominated for the most different categories than anybody ever. He has 14 Grammy wins, 33 nominations, all playing the banjo. This band includes Victor Wooten, who's considered one of the best bass players presently playing. His brother Future Man and Howard Levy. Future Man plays a sin star. Howard Levy plays basically a harmonica in several different levels. He's also played with people like Jeff Collins, Sam Bush, Tony Rice, all these great people. And he's won Grammys in jazz, bluegrass, pop, and world music categories. So there's an argument to be made that this is probably the greatest musician in America, in the world right now. And he's so unique. And I was listening to his song that I figured who better when you cut to the uniqueness, the greatness, and just all the odd things that happen to make perfect games and no hitters come. So that's where I got the name from. Yep, got the name from basically a banjo. So what are we trying to show here? But what I want to do is, like I said, I want to adjust the game score. And this is a game score that's going to be specific for no hitters and perfect games. They're outliners. It's okay to take them out and say, we're going to do different things for them because this unique thing happened with the luck. So what I wanted to do is how much better is the opponent at getting outs than the pitcher is generating outs? And what this means is if you have a team that gets on base more, than you are at keeping people off base. I want to take that game score for that perfect game and move it up a little bit. What you did is you went against somebody who was better at what you were doing, you know, was better at being a hitter than you were being as a pitcher when in terms of outs. And one of the good ones that this was Vita Blue's no hitter, which he pitched in 1970 when he was 20 years old. It was his third or fourth game of the season after being called up late in the season, and he went the Minnesota Twins, who were number one in batting average, number three in on base percentage, and number two in slugging percentage. This was a team that lost to Baltimore in the American League Championship game. This was a juggernaut of an offense, and it moved his score up by 9. And when I put the Yee-Haw factor in there, then I look at Lenny Barker's perfect game. I watched the game on TV. I was supposed to go to it, but it was a Friday night. My mom said it's a school night because I had school and I couldn't go. So Lenny Barker's against the Jays goes from 98 to an 86. It's still a really good game, but the team only their on base percentage was 286. Their batting average was 220. You were one of the best pitchers in the league that had high strikeouts, and one of the few times in your careers where you had low walks. You pitched a perfect game. It's great, but you didn't have the best opponent to do it. So that's how I figured out the difference in the out percentage. For the hitting percentage, it's much the same thing, but we're just looking at hits. If you're a good hitting team and you're going up against somebody that's not good at stopping hits, but they stop you because they got a no hitter or a perfect game, I want to adjust the game score up a little bit. And then on the same way, if you're mowing down people and you don't give up any hits to somebody that doesn't get a lot of hits, I want to take that score down a little bit. We're going to adjust that down a little bit because that information isn't in there. So that's what I was looking to do. That's what I looked to do in the Yee-Haw factor, is make those adjustments. So here's all the math I did. There's our pitcher outs and pitcher hit percentage. There are our batter out and our bather. There's Typo Man, our bather hit percentage. And what I'm using stats that are still there. The ROE we can take out. That's another typo. I'm sorry, I had some things going on last night. I didn't get to check this. We can take the ROE out on that point. Now we get our difference of outs and our difference from hits. And the Yee-Haw factor is just adding those two. And then what we do is that's going to be a percentage. We multiply the game score and we subtract the Yee-Haw factor from the game score. And that's going to either adjust it or bring it down based on, how much better the pitcher was, or worse than the pitcher was, than the team he was going up against for their season stats. And let's see how it changed the leaderboard. Some of the things it did here, Max Schermer's, you notice things didn't change that much. Vita Blues, 1970, no hitter, moves up into it was a little bit lower in there. It was about mid tier, and it moved itself up into one of the top 5s. You got Sandy Koufax gets moved up a little bit. Justin Verlander, Nolan Ryan moves up near the top, and one of his 7 no hitters had to be one of the better no hitters out there. And then Kershaw's game against in 2014 against the Colorado, his no hitter there, it moved up and set a new score there. So there did see some change inside there. And as I look through, this seemed to make sense versus them. Unfortunately, some of the ones that can't get up there that I'll talk about, just because we didn't have all the data for it, and the numbers are too wacky to really include. But I think we have a good model. Now we have to clean up the data. So using the model that we do for probability of no hitters and perfect games, let's take a look at the 2020-11 season, which I did no Yee-Haw factors with, because although I have some data sets, part of what I wanted to do is use publicly available and easy to get data for people. So I didn't use it. We'll correct that in the future. But as we look at 2021, we had 7 no hitters. 6 of them happened in April or May, and the last no hitter was in August. Obviously, last year, and we all know it, batters were at a disadvantage to the pitchers. The pitchers had some good things going for them. You had a shortened season, you had COVID, helped some ways. The pitchers were doing something with what was that, like spider tack and all that stuff. We all know what happened there. We also had apparently a different ball, as we found out. So we all had that things that we're going to, and I think a little bit is we now with pitchers we're getting them to where they are trying to get more outs. And they're trying to miss more bats, and they've gotten a little bit ahead of many of the batters that are out there. So what everybody was complaining about at the beginning of last year is batting averages were low and on base percentages were low. And most offensive stats had been decreasing. Now, if we look at the model we created by looking at the percentages of outs and hits that a pitcher faces, as the on-base percentage and the batting averages go down, that is going to be the perfect storm for no-hitters. Okay, fine, you might walk a lot of guys. We'll have some hit by pitches. We get some of the errors, so on and so forth. But the main ways you get a no-hitter, our pitchers were doing very, very well, and our batters were doing very, very badly. And we've seen a rash of no-hitters, and although no perfect games, the guy from Baltimore's name I can't remember right now did have the catcher's interference, and there was another one from Musgrove from San Diego. So we had some near perfect games, but we did not have any perfect games. And then suddenly in June, when they started making the pitchers, strip for the umpires, and they started tracking down on spin rates, to try to get the less of the sticky stuff happening on the batters. All of a sudden, when you do that, the offensive numbers went up, and our no-hitter tracks went down, which makes perfect sense. And it's one of those things that just logically you could think of. But now we have this model that we can use to do that. And even though this is very specific for no-hitters and perfect games, you can also use some of that logic to say, this is a model that sort of describes what's happening when the pitchers and the batters, usually one takes over the other, and you can have this model to see we're going to have less perfect games. We're going to, see less one hitters and two hitters. Pitchers are going to have to work a little bit more, and then that's going to be where you'll probably see them doing things like using openers and using more pitchers and bringing the pitchers in and start talking about how many times they go through the rotation. And I think this is a good model that could be the start to start looking at some of those other things. It's not the first time, and you can go back to other things. In 2010, we had 5 regular season no-hitters, 2 of which were perfect games, and then Roy Halladay had his postseason no-no. So which meant he had a perfect game in the regular season, and he only got a no-hitter in the playoffs. But all of those games also happened mainly at the start of the season, except for Roy Halladay's postseason game. And if you guys don't remember, in 2010, there were talks about, are they using a different ball, and things like that. So we had that same sort of conversation back 11 years ago. And now this says, well, yeah, obviously, if that type of thing's happening, we have more likely have that opportunity for that to happen. And I think there's some ways to use this probability model to sort of take a look at things that are outliners. And it's great that, and I love all the stats about all the stuff that's currently happening, but sometimes I like to look at the outliners and see what I can learn from them. As somebody that's been in data science, and I'm sure the other data scientist people out there that might watch this will say, there's a lot to be learned by the things that are really far off the graph. There's ways to help learn how to, maybe your algorithm's wrong or things like that. But looking at outliners is important, and you still have to try to model outliners to see why they got out there. So that was part of wanting to do this. Plus, like I said, I want to be a rating system for no hitters and perfect games. Now, here's the important part of this, and part of the reason why I did this way I did. You can do this too. Absolutely positively that you can do this. The information I got is RetroSheet data. It's from retrosheet.org. The Baseball Data Bank, layman's.com, Baseball Archive Statistics. The Chadwick Bureau, it's a Sabre member, Dr. Ted Tuasi. He keeps updates of some of this stuff and is adding some additional stuff in there. He helps Sabre develop their internal database stats, and I think he's worked with just about everybody that's done database stats. So he's trying to do it a way so you can use like Baseball Data Bank and RetroSheet, and Baseball Reference all use different player IDs. He's got a database where you can, if you can say pull something off MLB site, take their player ID and say I want to translate that back to a RetroSheet ID. He's got that information there that you can do that. And also, like we said, Baseball Reference. One of the Jeremys works there. I use that as my source of truth for baseball stats. So when I do my work and I'm taking this data from other spots, or I'm just compiling some of it myself and putting it in there, if I don't match up, or if my results say I want to write something that says, how can I calculate what Jose Ramirez batting average and slugging percentages on Wednesdays when he's had a day off on Tuesday, I can calculate that using the RetroSheet data and the play-by-play data. And I will go and check that on baseballreference.com to see if my numbers are sort of matching. And I generally assume they're right, I'm wrong if it's not matching. But also to do this, you need a way to use this stuff, to use this data. And it's so big. For a lot of this, especially play-by-play data, you can't, using Excel is fine, but you can't use Excel to do some of this stuff. So what I did on my project is I used a product called SQLite. It is a one program relational database that has SQL in it. You put one program on your computer and you can use it. It's really simple to use. It is in your it's used on your iPhone, it's used on your Android phone, it's used on your Windows machine, it's used on your Mac machine. If you have Linux, it's used in Linux. It's in airplanes, it's all over the place. It's free, it's public domain. These guys do a great job on it. I used a programming language called Python, which if you do data science, you're probably familiar with. It's a good programming language to use if you want to do any data analysis stuff. I originally started doing this using a lot of the data science modules and all the things like this, and started using a big machine, my big 32 gig machine and everything like that. I just wanted to pare this down because I really wanted to make it so other people could do that. And to do this, I actually used a old IBM T61 laptop that I bought at a Salvation Army and had to put a new hard drive in. So it cost me $100, and it had 4 gigs of memory, a very old hard drive, and I used the Debian Linux operating system, GNU Linux operating system on it. So basically, all of this work that I did cost me about $100 and my time. So other people should be able to grab this and start doing some of this stuff. And it's great that you can go to Baseball Savant, and the other guys have great ideas too for data, but sometimes it's, especially the play-by-play data, is so fun to play with. So what are my next steps? Some of the things I'm going to do is I think now it's gone to 3 articles about the RetroSheet data and the Baseball Data Bank data, how to get it into a database and how to find out stats like this. I am going to write an article about the code behind here, and I'm going to put it on so that people can download it. And my job would be to have enough steps there so people could go down and rerun my models on their computer in any way, shape, or form that they choose. Also, in generating this, you get this, you run all these player seasons. Greg Maddux finally got his no hitters. And in fact, on a couple seasons, on several times, he had 2 no hitters and 2 perfect games in 1 year. So I'm going to go back and just look to see which pitchers, based on their seasons, tended to get no hitters and perfect games inside there, which ones didn't, and then compare that to the list of giving them an average, and then compare that to the list of no hitter list and perfect game list that we have. And also, I want to look to see if Nolan Ryan 7 home runs were really an no hitters were really an outliner, or were they not? I have some tweaks to work on the error stuff, and getting the data a little bit more cleaned up. But I like the way that this is going so far. I do want to figure out a way to add park factors and home away splits, because obviously, if you go and pitch a no hitter in Colorado, that can be a little bit more of a feat than, say, pitching it at Cleveland, Cleveland, whatever we call our baseball stadium, or our team now, the Guardians. If you come to the Guardians and pitch there, that's more of a average park. Colorado is obviously more of a hitter's park, so I want to do that. But I really think I'm going to have to split these things into different eras. Probably like 1904, 1903, back to 1887, and then go further with that, just because of the data issues that we have, the way that sacrifices aren't always included. We might not have good data about certain things. We're still missing some information and things like that. So I would need to pare down this data a little bit more to try to get that in there. And I think that will help with the errors issue that we're having. And I may have to try to calculate one that's just specifically for each year, or try to find a way that I can eliminate the ROEs inside the math. But I don't want to do that because I tried to do that, and I got really, really frustrated. So those are my next steps there. And the one thing I wanted to mention, the fun part about doing all this is I get to look at perfect games and all of that stuff. So my favorite no-hitter is Ray Caldwell's no-hitter on the Yankees on September 10th, 1999. That was because on August 24th of 1999, with 8 2/3 in towards a complete game, he was hit by lightning and knocked unconscious. He later got back up, a little bit worse for the wear. He finished that game, and then the third game after that, he pitches a no-hitter. There's a good possibility he was tremendously drunk when he did that, or at least he was going to be. It's most certainly that he was hungover. David Wells will be very proud. Ray Caldwell, and I wrote an article about him. Near the end of it, he was let's see. They didn't say he had a drinking problem. He had a problem saying no, but he liked the amber that was brown and frothy, is what they used to say about him. But Trez Speaker for the Indians signed him after he flamed out with the Yankees, and signed him and said, "Here's your plan to pitch for the Indians, and if you agree to this, we're going to write it in a contract to do it. You pitch, go get as drunk as you want, sleep it off the next day, come." So day 2 is just get over your hangover. Day 3, or day 1, get over your hangover. Day 2, you come and throw you run wind sprints until I tell you you're done. Day 3, you throw batting practice. Day 4, you go pitch again. And for the end of the season, he went 9-1 and did a tremendous job in 1920 when the Indians went on to win the World Series. Interesting guy, but the fact that 20 days after you were knocked unconscious by lightning, you were there and you're in Yankee Stadium pitching no-hitter. My favorite perfect game is Addie Ho's. He was Greg Maddux before there was Greg Maddux. On October 2nd, 1908, he pitched a no-hitter against the White Sox. Cleveland, Detroit, and the White Sox. This was the last week of the season, and they were going in. They were fighting. They were all within a game and a half for first place. He came in and used 74 pitches, which by record is the least amount of pitches ever in a perfect game. So, which means he threw about 2 3/4 pitches to each batter. And he beat Ed Walsh, who was just coming into his prime, and the White Sox brought Cleveland into a tie with first place. He did 74 pitches with only 3 strikeouts in 1908, when it was the number of errors per game were 2, which would mean generally for each game you were going to get 1 base runner on base simply because of an error. So those are 2 of my favorite perfect games there. And yes, they're both Cleveland folks. I am a homer, and I will admit to it to the day I'm dead. So I'd like to thank anybody. Please bring me your questions, criticisms, and suggestions. I'm on Twitter at Sid Finch. If you're one of the smart folks that signs up for your Pitcher List membership, I'm also on Discord there, where you can bring me. Like I said, look for some articles coming forward. I'm going to show the code for this. I'm going to talk to you a little bit this year about how to get some of this free data and use it. And I love doing stuff like this because the people that create this data want people to use it, and I want to help people use that data. So that's part of what I've done there. So I guess we can ask any questions if Nick wakes up.
Oh, as if I would fall asleep, Matt. Oh, come on. That was awesome, man. That was really, really cool. Thanks for that.
Sure.
So a couple questions I have. I mean, obviously something like this, you made a simulation. You're saying, cool, these are all the no hitters and perfect games, that kind of thing. Moving forward, is this something that you kind of want to keep track of saying like, all right, this guy was 1 out away. We see like Max Scherzer, Jose Tabata putting in his elbow and losing a perfect game or something like that. And I want to be able to say, well, Matt's got this simulation. He says that there was a good percentage of that actually being a perfect game or not, or something like that.
That is one thing. And once I clear up just a couple things, that is one thing I'm going to start to do, is see how many times you get to 26 outs or 25 out.
Right.
And then it's still a perfect game. And it's not that hard to add. It's like any program you have, you start adding more features. But really, this simulator is like 30 lines of code. So it would be fairly easy, and I'm not tracking much. It would be fairly easy to do that. And that is one of the things I'd like to do, is just you have like run expectancy and win expectancy. And
right.
I think moving forward with a no hitter and perfect game expectancy would be kind of interesting. It would. Jeez, now you got me thinking. I'm already thinking how I can do that.
Well, there's also, you can do fun things of like Madison Bumgarner threw a no-hitter in 7 innings last year. But you can kind of assess how it was for that to be able to say, hey, what about these last 2 innings? What was the percentage of him actually going through with that?
We can do, I can do that. And one of the things I was going to do is actually do a 7th, change it and run some of these stats for just 7 innings.
Right.
Just to see. And then since I record the outs, I can say once it gets to so many outs, let's see how many end up as perfect games. Those are things that I could put in that would be relatively easy to do. I would probably take that with just using some recent retro sheet data to get that a little bit more specific.
And what about the stuff like Harvey Haddix and Rich Hill and Pedro Martinez?
Those are so hard to figure out. You almost need a new name for those.
Yeah, right. Those are no hitters to me. I don't care. Within the confines of everybody else, it's just not. They just weren't winning. It's not fair.
Well, I think at one of those you can just say, if you go 9 innings and anything else after there is just gravy.
Right.
If the NFL can get away with their overtime system, we can pretty much say we're not going to have one.
Don't do it, Matt. Don't do it. But no, really, thank you so much for once again doing an awesome thought-provoking PitchCon panel. And yeah, as Matt mentioned, he's involved inside the PL Plus Discord. So yeah, get your membership. Come talk to Matt all the time. Mess around with these amazing stats and baseball history. You are our baseball historian. This is true. Absolutely.
Yeah, we'll have more of those this year because we are going to have an Addy Hose nice write up. So.
Nice. That sounds great. But all right, Matt, thank you so much again for being part of PitchCon.
And thank you for having me a part of this. Hope everybody enjoys the talks further.
Sounds